Here we go. Come on, Mama. Come on, Mama. Still.
Hello and welcome to Sheep Chats. We're so excited you're here. I can't believe this is our last one this month, but you know what? We have some awesome guests today. Get excited. I'm Brittany Sweetie. I'm the communications manager with the Livestock Conservancy. And here with me today is our Shave 'em to Save 'em program coordinator, not a corner. That's weird. Sandra Kirscher.
Hey, everybody.
Lexie Hain today from the American Solar Grazing Association. Woo-hoo. Sandra, do you want to introduce yourself and then introduce Lexie?
Well, I think you just did it, but sure.
Just in case I left something out.
Let me just say that I'm super excited. Lexie and I started talking back in December about coming on to the Sheep Chat this month to talk about solar grazing with our heritage breeds, what solar grazing is, a little bit about American Solar Grazing Association, which Lexie is the executive director and co-founder of. And Lexie is also a solar grazer herself. So Lexie, how about you give us a little background on yourself and how you got started on this path?
Sure, and thank you very much for having me. It's an honor. So I have a farm here in upstate New York and in the Finger Lakes, and I've had a farm for almost 20 years. I've always had something to do with like different sustainability measures, right? And different parts of agriculture and energy. And so actually this particular thing, solar grazing, ends up being the composite of all those career paths and enterprises. I had a plant nursery for about 10 years here on the farm. It was a specialty wholesale plant nursery for living roof plants. So often in urban areas, you'll find it's so pretty. There's green all over the roof, and we grew those special plants. That was really cool, and then being in a horticulture business was great. And then eventually there came a time that it was get big or get out, and I got out. I was looking for something else to do and literally dismantling greenhouses. And I found out about solar grazing happening in North Carolina, which North Carolina has the second largest volume of ground mounted solar arrays in the United States. And so they had kind of a head start on this for us on the East Coast. And I thought it sounded like a really interesting thing to combine my interests. Here's agriculture on the one sector, and here's a way to maybe make money doing this kind of specialty niche thing. And on the other side, here's renewable energy deployed at scale, helping out lots of people. At least that's how it looked. And I got on a plane, went down to some solar sites down there, went to a training with some meant for farmers, and got some help from North Carolina Extension. And I was blown away. It totally worked. And I was like, oh, this works. I'm going to go buy some sheep.
Awesome. And yay, North Carolina Extension. I didn't know that was your part of the story, that's where you actually got your info and got started. Very cool. So let's talk a little bit about what we're talking about when we say solar grazing. Can you give a brief little overview of what exactly that is?
Sure. I describe it as, you're managing the vegetation at the ground mounted photovoltaics. So you're managing that vegetation using livestock. And in my case, most of the time we're talking about sheep. They have to be some pretty special solar arrays to be using anything but sheep. So sheep are basically naturally compatible with the solar arrays with the fewest modifications and the most performance. And the reason you need performance is because without the sunshine, the solar doesn't pay the bills. So you've got to get that sun. You got to need that sunshine guarantee,
Yeah. So I was noodling around on the internet, and I stumbled across a couple of other pictures from one of your previous podcasts or webinars regarding a couple of other species that actually fit well with sheep into the solar grazing paradigm. Do you want to touch on that real quick?
I think you might be leading me into honeybees. Okay. Okay, so where this is going, and as you can tell from my background, I wasn't trained, and I don't have a PhD in small ruminants, and I also don't have a ton of expertise in grazing. I've learned a lot, and I've been a practitioner now. I've owned a farm, and I also did have animals previously that I grazed. But one thing that I knew and I learned is that the very best grazing practices means that you're setting goals for the management of the land, and that one of those goals is improving biodiversity and also bringing in, compatible uses. So one thing that was sort of became obvious to me is that the beekeeping and solar grazing seem to be a good way for layered agricultural enterprises. We have beekeeping right here on the farm. I have friends who are commercial beekeepers, and they keep 13 to 15 supers out there all the time. And I said, oh, I think this should work. And then the more I learned about it, and the more I learned about there's some requirements for the solar industry, depending on where you're building your solar array, that beekeeping can really help out. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So touching on the requirements for the solar industry, what are the benefits? Like, I can see the benefits for farmers, and we can talk about that in a moment. But why would a solar company want to do this? Why would they want sheep on their property?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let me tell you, some people do look at you skeptically when you like to introduce livestock to your multi-million-dollar array right now. You don't mind, do you? I just have this idea it's going to be great for you. Yeah, and in fact, some of the early buy-in from this were some of the European American developers who said, oh yeah, I grew up on a sheep farm in Ireland, and in fact, I do think you're not totally crazy, lady. Like, this could work. And the developers, at the end of the day, many of them end up coming around to the solar grazing because I think we've been very lucky. There's been some people who really have tried hard to figure out, like, how does this really work and how does it work well? And it both works well for the animals, and Oregon State is documenting some of this, like cortisol levels in the sheep's wool, talking about their stress or their lack of stress, really, their water consumption, things like this. But more importantly for solar, it works well because the sheep get the hardest to reach parts of the solar, which means the most expensive, which means either the solar developer has to choose between maybe some herbicides, or maybe a lot of herbicides, or maybe a lot of hours with the landscaping crew with some weed whackers or other fossil fuels, and maybe a lot of them, or maybe you can work with a farmer and pay them instead. So that's one reason, is the sheep really, we've had a bunch of practitioners in this country doing a good job figuring out the mechanics of solar grazing.
And so, going back to the idea of using landscapers, there are several downsides to that for the solar farmer or the solar company, one of which, of course, is an expense. The other is there's some risk to the panels, correct? And potentially to the humans involved in the landscaping themselves.
Yeah, I was at a brand new 500-acre solar array, and you could already see where people had backed into parts of it. I was like, oh, no, So yeah, it's a little bit, it's not like totally fragile, but if you're going to be spending many, many hours mowing many, many acres, which now the number of acres for this is not small for some of these arrays, the chances of an accident happening, it's real. The other thing is certain kinds of mowers do kick up rocks, and the drier the conditions are, it picks up rocks. And the other kind of related angle is, and the National Renewable Energy Lab has been doing a good job promoting this low impact solar development, which is to say, instead of spending all that money towards the end of the project with bulldozers and earth moving equipment, like smoothing the site out. They're kind of letting it be a little more natural and rougher, which can be better for the general ecosystem.
Mhm.
So what that means, though, is that you can get more rocks and you can get more things that hit mower blades and hit people. And you can also build solar arrays on rougher ground, which means sheep in my, that means sheep to me. You get some, the other thing is if you're getting under the panels, especially for the types of solar that are the fixed systems, they don't move.
Mhm.
If you're under the panels, that's a lot of hours with the weed whacker and a lot of chances to hit your head. So.
Mhm. And hard on the back, I would think, leaning over like that.
Oh gosh, the person I know, so I'm friends with one of the other founders of ASGA. He has a landscaping firm that does all kinds of stuff. And the reason he got into this whole business is because his crews were so miserable maintaining the Cornell solar arrays. And he was like, I have sheep at home. And he ended up like going to Cornell and like trying to convince them to use sheep. And he was successful. It was great.
Awesome. So what about for the farmer? What are the benefits for a shepherd to get involved in this?
Sure. So it'll depend a little on where you live, because hopefully if you're like me, getting solar arrays built all like closer and closer to me. Like when I first did this 4 years ago, I had to drive like an hour to my solar array and tend my sheep. Now I'm like, oh, I could walk the sheep, So that's one thing, is the proximity. But the real benefits are things like around us, my sheep get like shipped out to work in sort of the April, May every year. And then that means we can make hay on our farmland. So in terms of dollars saved, I now have, they're eating it they're eating it right now. I have, our entire acreage was mown once and baled. And so that's one whole, savings. It's not free, but it's savings. And then I ended up bringing the sheep home in it was August, both the past 2 years, because of the dry weather. We brought them home in August, and then they did a full rotation of our farm again. But yeah, there's some savings around that, but also there's expansion of my farmland, right? Mm-hmm. So every year is a little different, but let's just say that I'm able to double the amount of farmland I have pasture now, which that's significant, and I get paid to graze. So let's be clear on this, everyone listening. No one does this for free, right? Mm-hmm. This is a real business model. There's real time, energy, expenses with all of this. So it is definitely like I have a farm business and then I have a grazing business, and they're linked. My farm business supplies the sheep to the grazing business. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a business venture, and it has been able to massively increase my flock and increase my lambs that I'm able to sell. I sell feeders, I sell, profits. So it's good.
Yeah. And you are raising meat sheep, correct?
I think of them as hair sheep, but yes.
Sorry.
They're meat sheep.
They are hair sheep. But I guess the product, unless you're selling breeding stock, are you selling for lamb? Okay. All right.
Yeah. I sell some rams every year. So,
okay.
And then the other thing is, we're getting to a certain point where, you can then sell other breeding stock, not just rams, as you develop a name and a reputation. So it's allowed me to scale up and now make little bits of money here and there on that kind of thing as well. Certainly, mine's like a commercial flock, but certainly, like I have a friend down in New Jersey, Julie Bishop. She's an ASGA advisor. She now, she's all about her registered Catawbans and all about like selling them with the certain grades of the hair code and this and that. So, and her business is 100% solar grazing.
Mm-hmm. And so solar grazing is not it's relatively new in the US, but it's not new across the world, across the globe, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I could you want a quick, like where and when history?
maybe quick where, when, and maybe what types are they? Is it, exclusive to hair sheep, or people using wool breeds as well? Is there a benefit to one or the other?
So I can't say for sure, but definitely Europe had some of the earliest. I think probably Germany, United Kingdom definitely had some of the earliest solar grazing, and not at large scale. It was often built on the farmer's own land. We saw that, and we saw some modifications made, and people figuring out how to do solar grazing in there. I'm thinking specifically in England. I've got some data there. Then we have like California has, I think, the biggest and oldest solar grazed array in the United States, Topaz Solar. That's with wool sheep, and a member of the California Wool Growers Association has been doing that for 7 years with like a lot of related conservation goals. It's a really neat project. And then in, like I said, North Carolina, and now up and down the East Coast and into the central states and Texas, there are more hair sheep producers in the United States doing this. But there are certainly some, it's just disproportionately hair sheep compared to the overall wool and hair sheep populations in the United States. There's a few practitioners who are early solar grazers who happen to just use a lot of hair sheep. But the other thing that's interesting is Australia, and we have to thank University of Queensland for this. Australia finally is picking up solar grazing, which you were like, oh, wouldn't they be first? It's a sheep country.
Right.
No, I don't. So University of Queensland got a grant and put in like these 3 research arrays. Anyway. And when they went to mow, they're very fancy research arrays, very expensive. They mowed it, and it's dry and hot in Australia. So what do you think happened? Yes, all the rocks kicked up, and they had many thousands of dollars worth of damage.
Oh no.
And so it occurred to someone that maybe they should look out in the pasture and just bring the sheep. I don't know. So, and what's interesting actually in rangeland conditions is you get this rain shadow effect. You get these green squares under the arrays. You can actually look at pictures from above, the drone pictures. So you get like an extended season of growth. And so this is what the Australians are now, like they've really scaled it up. University of Queensland built like a sustainability and sheep solar grazing welcome center. So they're actually my guests for our call this month, but they have a case study coming out this month on solar grazing with wool sheep and hair sheep, because most of them are using wool sheep, but very small are using usually Dorpers.
Cool. So to comply equally to both hair or wool production.
Yeah, you might. What's coming out with this study that I think is going to be interesting is that some of the Australians did do some extra shearing. And they also felt like there was some maybe a little bit of modifications to the cables, the wire handling. I find that generally over the lifetimes of the projects, it's a good idea to bundle wires together and not let them flap in the wind over a 30-year life cycle for a project.
Makes sense.
Just a thought.
So what is breeding like on solar farms? Maybe even a question prior to that is, are you or other solar grazers like, well, I know the answer to you already. You're rotating. You're going from your farm to your grazing sites, several grazing sites, if I'm correct. Are there any solar grazers that are kind of permanently placing maybe a small to mid-sized flock on a larger solar farm and staying the whole year, doing through reproduction and everything?
Oh, okay. So, I mean, this is from like Canada to Florida. I mean, I would say everyone has to have a home base of some kind, just to treat a sick animal or sick animals or something. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't have that I'm aware of. I would certainly recommend always having like a home farm, home base of some kind or another. I really know most people in the North and upper Midwest do take their sheep home in the fall. I don't generally recommend overwintering your flocks. And the reason is it's then you have to be able to know that you can get supplemental feed and some water out there. And the water is easier to do than the feed, I think, but it worries me a little about the feed. I think we're going to see all kinds of innovations, like as people like lease some of their farm and, you know, they manage their own array on their own land like they do in England. So maybe there will be people, but having sheep on solar arrays more in the winter. I just worry because solar has some extra special regulatory structures considering it, like around it. So I've been discouraging people to keep their sheep on solar arrays after some point in the fall. It's just things like water runoff, and like if you have say all the sheep run, just manure runoff. I would just have another place for them. If you're gonna have I have a sacrificial area on my farm. I'm sure a lot of people do, like the barnyard. You know, I don't want that to be on a solar site. So is that kind of helpful?
Yeah, that makes sense. I totally get that for the Northeast, where you guys are more likely to get, and the Mid-Atlantic too, where you're more likely to get snow. You're going to have that runoff in the late winter, the early spring. Plus just the colder temperatures that we have. I mean, I know farmers who are lambing, you know, completely outdoor. They're not lambing in barns down here. So, I mean, to me, that leads to, you know, maybe possibly, especially with some of our breeds that are a little more primitive, a little more hardy, they lamb without any problems. They don't need assistance 99% of the time. It might be a doable thing to actually lamb on a solar site, or would there be other reasons that you, in the South?
For sure. No, and I know some people who lamb. My friends up in, it's a Shady Creek Lamb Company up in Ontario. They lamb every year on their solar site, and it's 200 acres. And it doesn't even have that good a perimeter fence. So they have permanent livestock guardian dogs with the sheep and electronet. You know, wow. It's Canada. This is a good Canadian story, right? No, but for real, they do specifically lamb every year. I think it's May or June, and it's intentional to wait until what they're trying to do is match the peak forage curve with the ewes' needs.
Yeah.
So they do it on purpose, and where I'm going with this is, since they don't have great, not foolproof perimeter fences there, it just means they have to have guardian dogs. But they already have to have guardian dogs. So that would be just one reason, is the predators, and in their case it's coyotes, but you know, attracting predators. So coyotes, maybe stray dogs. You know, your lambs are more exposed. You don't have, I mean, I had a dozen bonus lambs in July this year.
Congrats.
They were totally fine. They were the other thing to say is, you know, the solar really provides shelter for them. So they can stay, even the tracker sites, which is, you know, they move really slowly. I think that I think the other reason though, so the sheep are, you know, but is the parasite resistance goes down, you know. So if you are worried about parasite resistance in your sheep and you might have a rare breed, you know, I might lamb, you know, in the winter or something. Lamb when, or maybe during a dry season you're lambing, and then you can have the sheep a little bit more monitored and protected during that period. And then once their immune systems pop back up again and they have that resistance. But yeah, like the lambs don't have that resistance, and that would be the other thing to think about, is you don't want to lose lambs for that. The Cornell study pretty conclusively was like, we want people using dry ewes. North Carolina, there are some flocks that basically do spend all year there though. So one thing that I recommend, and they have this at it's called Montgomery Sheep Farm, is there's an adjacent 70 acres where the ewes go for the rainy season. Again, it has to do with like stormwater compliance issues and not wanting to like create a big muddy mess somewhere.
Yeah.
It also has to do with safety. You know, you have technicians who do show up at these solar sites, and it's not every day. In fact, it's maybe twice a year. But you have to assume that they have to be able to traverse the site safely, often in vehicles or just walking around. And that's another reason we need the sheep, is to keep the vegetation controlled somewhat.
So talking about the technicians and livestock guardian animals, how do they mix? Or maybe not.
Yeah. What I suggest, usually there's the same firm, like in my area, there's a firm that services all the regional solar arrays. And that's at the bigger solar arrays, there are also permanent technicians that are assigned to that array. You just have a protocol for if you need to move the sheep out of a certain area, or, usually, the sheep are not, they're not wandering around the whole solar site. They're usually, we're going to talk about, managed grazing here. For this to work, it really has to be a little bit controlled, and you have to subdivide your solar sites. So, yeah, I actually have a document that I give when I sign a contract with one of my firms. I give them, and it's called Meet the Grazing Sheep, and it's a little like, what are sheep? And I'll come out, like I volunteer to go out and like help people, because there's rams. People have been like, how about rams on a solar site? So so the protocol I suggest is like with your contract, you say, especially if it's a new firm or a new area, you say, how about we do a little show and tell? So that it worked. I mean, this is the Livestock Conservancy, but you probably know better than I do. A lot of people haven't seen any livestock in their whole lives. So
Right.
It's good to take a little time with them.
And I'm just thinking about liability issues with livestock guardian dogs and rams. That maybe something worth thinking about. And I imagine that you do think about that. That's probably you have to have liability coverage. Is that part of the contract for having a grazing contract?
It definitely is. So if you already own your own farm, which I'm lucky enough to do, usually the additional insurance isn't too bad. It's just some additional rider. It usually has to do with meeting an umbrella policy of $2 million usually, but sometimes it's $5 million. But it's you definitely carry additional site insurance. The other thing I'll note is there's some jokes about the technicians with their bucket of tools and like so where I'm going with this is if you have sheep, you probably follow me right now. You have like a bucket that sounds like a grain bucket, and this is a technician with it, and then like basically like the herd, like that your flock like is like, yay, thank you, new friend. So there's all little nuances like that, but hopefully you're at a solar site where there's like the same technician and you kind of get with the protocol. And if there's like they have to work on a certain area, you move your sheep over to the other side and like it's all good. So that's the liability thing is another reason we don't graze for free, because I have like significant insurance because of all the different companies I'm working with. So I got to pay for that.
Well, you have the insurance and you have a lot of infrastructure, right? You've got to have a truck and a trailer to move them. You've got to have some kind of handling facility, either that you take with you or that you leave on your larger sites.
Yep.
And then water and electricity. Like, hopefully you have electricity at a solar site. You were talking about, no, not always. Okay.
I know, I make it sound more and more fun, don't I? Just like in the park. So you were talking about I want to get back to one other thing. So so trailers, trucks, handling systems.
Infrastructure, the cost of the operational cost of this is what we were,
Okay, sorry. Our ASGA group has a working group working on an enterprise budget for solar grazing. Right, there's a little working group trying to chew on it. The University of Maryland, Sue Shonen is on the committee, so thank God. So hopefully we will have an Excel sheet for people so that then they can go, oh, for my size flock and for the distance to the solar site, I should at least, I need to meet at least this figure, or, how much to charge. So I'll go to electric first. There's something called an auxiliary box or an aux box. Basically, there's little 110 outlets, or you can even get 220 sometimes. And some people put in, if you ask, they'll put it in for you. It's not a big additional cost, but it's not always standard. And it just because they figure no one's at the solar site who will need electricity, something to that effect. It also has to do with wanting to sell all the power that they're producing and not use any on site.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was another sticking point with one firm. Water. If you're lucky enough to be, talking to a solar company in a design phase, or even just talking to somebody, it's really the companies that own the projects. So sometimes there are people who are just developers, and then what they do is then sell to the people who are going to become the eventual owners. And so the people who are the owners are the ones that you may have to talk to about putting in a well or hooking up to municipal water. It turns out a lot of rural areas in like Texas, North Carolina have municipal water already. So as long as you have that, it should be good to go. The sheep do drink less under the panels and have more shade and are less stressed.
Brittany, have we had any questions come in yet?
We have, yeah.
We could also, actually, if you want to, real quick, we could throw that survey question, one of the 2 survey questions out, see if we can get some answers to that while we answer questions.
I've had the one up about let us know what sheep breeds you have and if you're doing targeted grazing already. So continue to let us know you're here and what you raise. And let's see what we've got. Let's see. Hi, Jean. Thanks for joining us today. We're so glad you're here. Hi, Joy. Thanks for joining us today. We're glad you're here. Joy.
Hey, Joy.
Are you sending LGD with your flocks of sheep or just sending the sheep?
I am just sending the sheep, and I hope I can always just send the sheep. I don't want to have to go every day to feed my dog. And I definitely have solar sites where, I have some ram lambs that are, 5 months old, and they're just going to be fine. So, I check them every 3 days. So if the fence is good and solid, and especially if I'm familiar with the solar site already and have a sense of it, I don't want to have to go every day. And I also worry that my dog is going to be a pest to the neighbors. I mean, I'm here in upstate New York, which is reasonably rural, but we all know how they like to bark. And my concern is that he might attract unwanted attention. I definitely consider us to be a little bit the face of the solar firm. That's just another thing you should be aware of is the solar firms are usually back in wherever they're back in, some, a city in Boston or New York. And we end up being the face of the neighborhood, So I get questions all the time. I get people stopping by all the time. I mean, not all the time, but like every couple of weeks, someone wants to stop and talk, or did you forget a sheep here? And you just understand that you're a professional, and also that like the dog thing, I've been trying to avoid the dog thing. I do know people using emus down in Texas, and then donkeys in, once you get to larger solar sites, meaning utility scale, meaning over 100 acres, I do think you're going to see a lot more guardian animals, but you're also going to see more of like a full-time operation there. So build it into the plan.
Good to know. Hi, Marilyn. Thanks for joining us today. Marilyn says they just put in a huge solar in Kerhonkson, New York, where we live. Can you direct me to a business model to begin researching?
I'm going to look up where Kerhonkson is while it's that. That is a brewing company in Kerhonkson. Oh, I know where you are. Okay. All right. So solar grazing business model. Sure. So, I mean, I would just say join ASGA. Go to solargrazing.org and join us. The other thing you can do is when you join ASGA, we do have, why, thank you. We do have a tool we created to help solve this problem, which is map.solar.org. map.solargrazing.org. It's included in your membership, and you actually do get to post yourself. So if you have a flock and you're looking to sort of take up targeted grazing, which this really is, you can list yourself on it. You can also list yourself as, I'm just a sheep producer selling sheep. You just make that clear. And otherwise, yes, there's a lot of us figuring out this business model right now, and that's who we are. We're getting the enterprise budget up and going. We interview people every month. It's all posted on our website. We've been doing it for 3 years, so there's a good amount of screen time you can have and learn what people are doing all over the world. Mm-hmm. And yes, you're going to see more solar sites in that area. So yeah, love to have you.
That's a great question. Joy says she's raising Leicester Longwool Tunis, and we just added Rommeldale. I'm sending the frat house all this year's ram lambs at weaning to a 6-acre site about 10 minutes away. That's awesome.
That's absolutely perfect, Joy. We want to hear how you do. I'm super excited about that. Please keep you write us at the Solar Grazing and see how it goes. I've got a lot of people starting in this way where they start with like a smaller site and they do a pilot for a year, and that's perfect. Not so overwhelming. It's like makes a big problem like small, like just getting the mechanics going and not also having the expense of like, oh, I need a big truck and a big trailer. It scales the approach. So good luck.
Yeah, Joy, please keep us posted about that. We want to know how it works with heritage sheep, with the long wool sheep and the fine wool too. Yeah.
Absolutely. Hi, Marcia. Thanks for joining us today. Marcia says, smallest profitable solar grazing area that you know of. I know of the 10-acre test sites in Indiana.
Sure. And Hoosier Electric did a test. It was like a 3-year test of solar grazing on sites all about that size. We interviewed them this year. You're welcome to look it up. I think it was early in the fall. What was interesting is that Hoosier Electric, which is the major, so it's the major utility for a bunch of I think it's South and West Indiana. They determined they were not paying their grazers. They had just decided they were going to like work with some people and not pay. And their major take home from that test was that they have to pay their grazers. We were like, what are you going to do next year? And Hoosier was like, we're going to pay people. So to profitability, I don't know that I can speak to that. I can tell you can contact Sue Shonen and University of Maryland and talk to her about like what it would look like for you. To me, this is like a very personal conversation. Like, how many sheep do you have? Are you just buying sheep? Are you buying a frat? What do they call it? The frat club? The lambs? Are you buying?
Yes.
Are you fattening them and are you selling them off? Like, I don't know enough about your business model, but certainly you can slice this problem many different ways. You don't necessarily have to go into it with like, I have a farm and I've got to graze hundreds of acres. You might just find a different way to bring in a little more agricultural income for yourself.
Thanks, Marcia. That was a good question. Mark, I see you have. Thanks for joining us today. We're glad you're here. I'm glad that you have a question about developing a new breed, but we're going to keep it to solar today. We'll follow up with you after the chat.
Oh, torpedoes. Interesting.
Thanks, Mark.
I don't know anyway, but maybe I'll just say a little like,
yeah, go for it.
For the potential for people to use this opportunity to do things like have more grazing area and try the different heritage breeds. Like, I'd love to see that. I do think could be some real resonance with some of the solar companies if you approach them with this, especially if it were like a little bit of an organized effort and said, we found 6 producers who have these 6 different rare breeds and they're all interested in getting involved and kind of did a matchmaking. But I could see it being a really positive story for both, the sheep producer and the solar company.
Thanks. I think that's all of our questions for right now, unless people want to So watch it want to let us know what kind of sheep they have or if they've seen, let's see, what was our other question? If you've seen ground mounted solar arrays in your area. So let us know. Sandra, do you have extra questions for Lexie?
I do. I'm sure people are curious about what we've kind of skirted around the issue of money here. But I'm sure people are curious about what the income potential is with solar grazing.
Yeah, so, and ASGA members and some other producers, as well as landscapers and other kinds of operations and maintenance professionals. So that's my way of saying the different classes of people who are doing this work have all contributed to a study that the National Renewable Energy Lab has assembled, and they've submitted it for publication this month. So the most up-to-date information on, gross income per acre, and potential receipts, and then some of the costs associated with that should be publicly available this year. We have on our website a tab. We have a research tab. Go solargrazing.org, go to research. Just NREL for our national lab. When that study is available, I think it's going to be very useful because it covers a wide geography of the United States, and it should actually start having some real costs and income in there. I'll say a couple other things. I'll say that there's the Cornell study that I helped put together in 2018 and was published in 2019. It did look at gross income for producers in New York and a number of other Northeast and upper mid-Atlantic states. New York looked like the best place to do business, and maybe it is, but I think really more what it was is that New York only had solar sites that were like 50 acres and less as part of the study, which is really all that was built in New York at the time, versus all the rest of the states had some very utility scale solar sites. So there were sites in North Carolina that were hundreds of acres, so you won't get as many dollars per acre. So you can go to the Cornell tab on our site, but the gross income per acre in New York, the average is between $500 and $600 an acre. For the rest of the country, it was like just over $300 an acre, $300 to $350. I will say, and then my final comment is, we are not near the finish line at understanding this. There are two data points. One is the Cornell study, and the second is the National Lab study. The solar industry has really just begun in the United States in terms of its build out. So I really feel like we're going to have much better numbers in 5 years. I've spent a lot of time talking and working with solar companies. They really want to get a handle on this too and want to understand indicative pricing. So one thing I'll tell people is there starting to be special requests for sheep producers to bid into the vegetation maintenance. So this is definitely starting to be a real profession. Seeing it from some of the top solar companies in the world and some very, very ambitious goals for them. So here we go.
Well, there's big potential.
Yeah, that's exciting.
All right, we have perfect tunis here, I see.
Yes. Let's see. Pamela, oh, sorry, Lexie. This is a big question. I do apologize. I'll take it down so you can answer it. But hi, Pamela. Thanks for joining us today. She keeps spinners flock of LLW and CVM plus crosses. I am not a breeder, but a wool producer. I buy pure breeds not destined for breeding. We are in the option phase of a 30-acre solar lease on our farm that has direct access to existing pasture. I was interested in solar grazing before happening across this endeavor.
That's really awesome. So Pamela, this is really cool. You're actually making me add something to my to-do list right now. Not something people do normally during presentations. But
So working session.
I said it was going to be casual and fun. Here we are. No.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about this is a bunch of things. One is you may be in a position which is really ideal to add in it's something I've been recommending to people, and hopefully it's a really great idea. It's one of the only tools that I think is I think it's a really good tool for people in your position, which is it's a vegetation maintenance option of right of first refusal in your solar lease. So you're probably leasing that 30 acres. And yeah, it says lease. Okay, sorry, not sale. These can be all kinds of different structures, but if it's the right of first refusal, and I'm actually working to get together the language and then share it. I have some lawyers who I was going to have a look at it because what you're doing with the solar lease is like a real estate transaction. But what we want to then do is have a little, I've been trying to crack this nut for a few years, have a little kind of rider in it that then directs people over to the fact that you, the landowner, have the first option to control that. So whether you have the sheep and execute, or whether your neighbor has the sheep and you control that contract. That's what I'm trying to do, is keep the land, and someone in your position gave the farmers that power over this contract and that additional income stream. The second thing I'll say about all this is that this all ties right into farm viability. And there's a talk on Thursday that I'm helping with, but there's been a paper in Maryland by IEER, Institute for Energy and Environmental Research, that starts looking at what happens if you add a little solar to your land. How can this impact and stabilize a farm enterprise? The first of its kind. And I've been very supportive of that paper because I really feel like a lot of, farming is incredibly expensive, and we have to find other ways of bringing in money and also stable income. But in this case, it's usually like a 30-year income stream. So I hope that was enough of an answer for you.
That's a great answer.
Plus the to-do list,
Yeah. Lexie, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about managed grazing. Maybe this is a good time to.
Yeah, so I guess there's two different parts of that. One is I'm working to try and, bring in people like NRCS, but I do feel like you should be treating these solar acreages as pastures. We should be working at the upfront to establish pastures, to establish forages that are edible to the sheep, nutritious to your animals, but also, not too tall in certain cases. They've got to meet the height restrictions of the solar, which may or may not be restrictive at all. It depends on the particular development. And think of this as something where over the lifetime of those 30 years, you're building up the soil, you're taking care of the watershed, and hopefully there's even money in there for you to, look at reseeding budgets. So I do suggest, especially once you get to any solar, I make my own grazing plans every year, every season, as I'm building out what does it look like for my contracts, as every season I'm growing and adding more sites. Which sheep go where, when, and how is the season going to look? And then how do I subdivide all my sites appropriately? Once you get to a certain scale, I really feel like you should bring in a grazing professional and do this for you. So what I'm also finding is that the solar companies are willing to at least, of course, they'd love to do it preferably maybe for free, but also the solar companies, I think, could be all ears about this. Let's bring in a grazing professional to plan out the vegetation maintenance for 30 years. I think there's going to be more and more buy-in to that kind of thing, especially as things like carbon sequestration in soils become a bigger, more prominent issue. Mm-hmm. The other thing I'll say is, once you get to solar sites over a certain size, and let's just arbitrarily 50 acres, putting in interior paddock fencing is another thing I work with solar firms to do. The perimeter fencing is standard. It's required by the National Energy Code, but interior paddock fencing, you have to kind of work with the developer to say, look, this will pay for itself, which means we kind of need this long-term, we're going to be here for you in 10 years and you're going to be here for us. So it's a different kind of problem to tackle, but it's something that's really important because, you know, you're at a solar site that's 1,000 acres. We're going to need some interior fences.
Yeah. And so if it were a solar site of 1,000 acres, what size paddocks are you thinking about for those interior fences?
Completely depend on where you are in the country. So
yeah, and how many sheep?
Yeah, West Texas versus Maryland, it's going to be a vastly different answer. But I'll just say that, you know, what we're seeing in the East so far is about, it depends on the level of disturbance from the construction and what was planted there before. But I think you can get to about, you know, like about 3 sheep per acre, adult dry use is what people are seeing as like ballpark, you know, like rule of thumb. What we're seeing out west, and like we were saying in Australia, is you're actually seeing increased stocking rate from what they might normally see because of the under the shadow, under the panels effect is where we're actually able to get more, so more grazing than you might, there you might have, you know, 3 acres per sheep normally, but maybe with solar grazing, you're getting a little better than that.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's why the Australians are going to come on to solar grazing, which is interesting too. So,
better late than never.
That's right. We've got one more question come in. Do we have time for this?
Sure.
All right. Sorry, Lexie. One more time. Thanks for joining us, Jessica. We're glad you're here. Jessica wants to know. Hold on. There we go. How much access do you have to the site? For instance, to check on sheep, fill waters, for checking for exotic plants. We raise BLs for the primary purpose of mowing our greenhouse and solar panels, but I may be too much of a helicopter mom to send them far away.
So Jessica, I think this is a really good question with a couple parts to it. So I'm going to start first with just the access question. I have full site access 24/7, and it's written in my contract. So one thing you should all know also is that at solargrazing.org, we have a contract. There's actually 2 versions of it, but we have a contract that is freely available that we produced with our law clinic to help with this kind of thing. But you have got to, it is a responsible thing, animal welfare wise, to have 24/7 site access. I haven't been to my solar site since November, but I live in upstate New York. If I lived in Florida, I would be checking on my sheep today. So that's number one, is absolutely, like, I have site keys, I have site combinations, I have a list of all those things, and I keep them. Absolutely. And do I check? Yeah. So to check on the sheep, fill waters. You know, this year we did have to fill water a lot more starting in July. I did have to haul a lot more water. Our company had to haul a lot more water. So in the long run, we're looking to get longer term contracts and get, you know, wells on site. The other thing you can often look for is there other water available right next door or something else? So you kind of figure that out. Like some of the Cornell sites, there's water. It's at an ag research station. Just need permission to, you know, fill up there. Checking for toxic plants is something I do, and I have some background there. I don't find that there's more toxic plants, but there can be invasive species that are introduced. That said, almost, you know, as part of the permitting process, at least in, you know, New York, Pennsylvania, a bunch of other states, there is an huge environmental management guide, as well as like state regulations that talk about, you know, how to manage any introduced invasives. But I check for toxic plants. I also check the fence line like pretty regularly, definitely before I sign a contract. And then once I've signed it, I walk fence lines and check all that. But once you do that, you know, maybe your perfect job, Jessica, I don't know, maybe you won't become a solar grazer, but maybe you'll help train someone else who wants to learn how to care for sheep and start their business. So it's not a perfect fit for everyone, but it could be something where I find there's not enough people in this country that have really good knowledge about, you know, how to care for livestock and sheep, and it could be just a different role. Maybe you'll consult or mentor someone. So I encourage you to get involved in a way that, you know, suits you. Thank you. Good
question, Jessica. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Lexie, we're coming down to the wire here. What else do you think is important for folks to know if they're considering getting into solar grazing?
Great question. I would say that there are resources out there that you probably already know of, things like Cooperative Extension and NRCS, and to bring people like that into the conversation. I would also say that the solar companies, I've been out there for 4 years trying to convince people to put livestock on solar arrays. And so it's not as crazy an idea as it maybe was. So what I find is that if you find out about a solar array coming to your area and you want to get involved, there's usually a public process around this. It's posted on websites, your town clerk will know about it, your county officials will know about it. There'll be ribbon cuttings, there'll be publicly announced meetings. I find you can just go up to those developers, and you should figure out it's the developer, not usually the land agent, and introduce yourself, hand them a business card, and invite them to see your grazing operation, invite them to see your farm if you want to get involved, and kind of start there with the conversation. And I find that often they're just delighted and at least happy to have that conversation. So yeah, that's what I'd say, is get involved if it sounds good. We're going to need all the people with knowledge we can get.
Yes. And it's a great way to get more rare sheep on the ground, right?
It would be so wonderful. I could really see that. Do you have a map of where they all are that I can learn? That would be cool.
They are all across the country. Our website has an online breeders directory with a map. So if you wanted to just search sheep and see all the little pins pop up across the U.S. for rare sheep, that would show you everybody that's opted in.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see like some fiber stories built out of this. I'd love to see some rare breed restoration built out of this. And, there's income, as you can see, there's an income source here that, farmers don't usually have. So that's where I'm sort of hopeful that it could be another, like a happy story for some of these breeds.
Yeah. And farmers generally need more income sources. So
Absolutely.
Win-win. Lexie, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have you and to share the information about solar grazing. Folks, please, if you're considering or you're curious, go to solargrazing.org, become a member. There's lots of good information. As Lexie said, she's got contracts on there that are available for members to use. Monthly webinars talking with solar grazers across the country. You can figure out what works for them, what didn't work for them. Learn a lot of good stuff before you jump in.
Best of luck to y'all. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Brittany, you want to take us home?
Sure. Thank you to all of our members for watching today. It's support from you that makes chats like this possible. So thank you. And if you're not a member, please let us know. We'd love for you to become a member. You can go to our website and we'll tell you all about that. Our shameless plug for the day. And if you're not involved in the Shame 'em to Save 'em program for our wonderful heritage breed sheep, then please let us know. We would love to get you hooked up with that so you can not only graze them with solar, but also shave them and make some awesome projects with it. I think we have a new challenge coming up maybe sometime soon. So look for that. Next month, we are celebrating chickens. So yay. I hope you'll tune in to learn about some chickens. We've learned so many amazing things about sheep this month. So thank you to everyone. Hope you have a great week and we'll see you again soon. Thanks again, Lexie.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.